Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. And on this journey, it's remarkable to connect with cats who have been able to support themselves in their career playing music that arguably they love. Sometimes you have to take that Mexican wedding, or you got to take that bar gig or funk gig or corporate gig that pays well. But my next guest is somebody who was able to really create his own paradigm, playing with a lot of big bands, a lot of Latin swing, but also able to adapt to the changing times in music through the 70s and 80s. Steve Huffsteter, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Well, thank you, Jay.
Steve, I'm not sure if you've heard this or not, but we lost the great producer Creed Taylor, and I was wondering, I interviewed him twice, and very deep dude, and I was wondering what your favorite CTI or Creed Taylor production was.
You know, I wouldn't be able to say it all. I had a lot of kids early, and we never had very many records of any kind. You know, I heard music over the radio and at friends' houses and things like that, but there was never very much music in the house, I'm afraid.
But I just want to be clear, you're hip to who he is, though.
Oh, sure.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, like, the guy was... some of that, yeah, I mean, I was just wondering, like, because there was just so many, and it makes sense. You weren't, would you say that, how quickly were you on the bandstand 6-7 nights a week, 3 sets a night?
From the time I started playing.
Which was what age?
Whatever the drinking age, I guess it was 18. I grew up my high school years in Phoenix, so by the time I was out of high school, I already had a reputation. Phoenix was very small then, and what few good players were available didn't want to work nights. You know, they had day gigs. And so right away I started working the nightclubs as soon as the law would allow me to.
Well, I live in it's so classic because I live in Tucson now. I need to know.
Oh, yeah.
I need to.
This was Phoenix.
Yeah, I know, but I'd like you to talk about some of these. Essentially, you were going to the black part of town to play R&B gigs.
Sorry, my phone just slipped off of my ear at that point.
No, I was wondering if you made it. There was a specific black part of town in Phoenix, and I assume you went down there and played R&B and stuff like that. Can you talk about
I did, yes.
Can you talk about some of those clubs in the black community and how basically, like, it was a welcoming vibe?
Well, the thing I never realized was that South Phoenix was the birthplace of the Black Power movement. And I certainly, you know, it seems strange to me that I never felt any of that when I would go down there. I was always welcomed. You know, the Colored Elks in South Phoenix, Bob's Chicken Shack.
Oh my God! You got to be kidding me, dude. Wait, hold on. You're telling me the birth of Black Power happened in South Phoenix?
Yeah.
Dude, that's. I mean, that just blew my mind already.
The old man's name was Muhammad something, but he was Muhammad Ali was one of his disciples.
Absolutely, and you. But the point is, you would go down there, play barbecue joints, and like it was just and like, can you talk about? I mean, can you talk about like the original music that you were playing down there, or were you playing top 40?
Oh no, top 40 didn't exist then.
You're playing like Hank. It was like Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. Or?
I'm talking about early 50s. Wow. I would play blues down at the Colored Elks, where there was blues all night.
Oh my! Wait, what was it called? What was the place called?
It was just the Colored Elks Club.
The Colored Elks.
Yeah.
Jeez, we can't get away from it. It's insane.
I mean, that was in the day. That was the what black people called themselves. I think, or what they were called, but apparently they called themselves because it was known as the Colored Elks Club.
Can you just talk a little? I mean, that to me was a very. Can you talk to the audience a little bit about? Well, you didn't really listen to a lot of the radio, but you were attracted.
The radio was all I heard.
The radio was all you heard. So, do you remember the payola scandal?
Sure.
Can you talk about the genesis of that? For my audience, it's just.
I have no idea. That was. I have no idea of anything that's ever gone on.
But at the core, the R&B of the late '50s, which is when you were getting your sea legs, was Dyke and the Blazers.
I guess that's where it all was. Yeah.
And it was very racy at the time. So the next thing you know, a lot of radio stations stopped playing that music, and you'd have Tom Jones or some blue-eyed white guy singing this more whitewashed version of that song. But did you learn blues and R&B before you learned jazz vocabulary?
Oh, sure, because it was a lot of it on the radio. The Phoenix radio actually was pretty broad in the content. There was a classical station, and occasionally there would be a jazz. Some station would try jazz for a while, but back then the pop music was much of it was jazz based.
That's right.
And so once in a while, the jazz we were getting there was mostly West Coast jazz that we would hear. It wasn't until I was in college that I started really that I would meet people that would introduce me to the jazz messengers and Miles and all of that.
I mean, Brother Huffsteter, man. I mean, you were listening? Were they playing like Shelly Manne from the Black Hawk on radio? Like, what were you hearing on the West Coast specifically?
It would depend on what the industry was pushing. Stan Kenton, of course, but the Chet Baker, Jerry Mulligan era.
Yeah, I did.
All of that got a lot of play.
And that's what you were hearing. What about Joe Gordon?
Joe Gordon?
He left us early.
Well, not many people know about Joe Gordon.
Well, you're talking to Jake Feinberg, man.
Joe Gordon came to the West Coast completely broke. He didn't even have a trumpet, but he had some connections. And I loaned him a trumpet, which he did all his West Coast recordings on. And
no way! I just dropped Joe Gordon by chance, and you're telling me that you let him use your trumpet?
Yes, and he died with it.
Oh my!
I never got it back. But man, the recordings he made on that trumpet, is great.
Dude, I'm so honored that you just told. Can you talk about how you navigated this? I don't know about Gordon, but Baker, at least I've interviewed Herb Albert a couple times. The guy was like, begging, pawning horns for dope, and there was a lot of heavy drug use, and I think a lot of people. I just wanted you to talk about how you navigated that, because I think people obviously got addicted.
Couldn't afford it. I got married at 18. I was a father by 19. By the time I was 30, I had 4 kids. It was.
There are a lot. I mean, we're all fathers. I'm saying it doesn't mean people don't go off the rails. I mean, the temptation was always there. So, what does it mean to you fundamentally when you had your children? You just
fortunately, not many junkies made it to Phoenix. If they did not, as musicians, I had a few friends that were junkies over the years, and they always treated me with great deference. They would never come to my house stoned. They would never steal from me. They would never. They would always try to protect me from bad influences and everything.
No, I was talking more once you got out to Los Angeles at that time, that early 60s. Stan Getz was out of his... I mean, not that you were hanging with these people, but, like, was there, even at the gigs...
It wasn't... There were very few people in the group, in the people that I would hang with, who were all, that were there for the studio work, and that means, you got to be places on time, show up looking and sounding right, and it would happen occasionally. I remember doing a live recording with Gerald Wilson, and Gerald was going to record this piece that had been written by his trombone player, and who, typical of junkies, got extra ready for the gig and never showed up. and Gerald went ahead and recorded the number, and he said, "This was written by so-and-so," and he said, if he was here, he'd be sitting right there in that empty chair.
You know what I was thinking of before you really got entrenched in the studio scenes, in those jazz scenes, like at least in New York, David Amram never did drugs, but like there was a certain thing, like if you were on junk, like you had to be in the club, and if you weren't on junk, you weren't necessarily trusted. And so before you really became a household name in those jazz communities, I mean, that early 60s period is intoxicating on the West Coast. I mean, but Shorty Rogers, everybody was partying at that time. I'm just saying, like, was there a vibe that in order to be a genius like Bird and like, you needed to be on junk?
Well, back in the 50s, there was definitely a vibe like that. There was a whole type of alto saxophone players, young alto players, who thought that they had to be total a-holes in order to be,
Yeah.
One came to Phoenix, young guy, and he went strutting around town for about a year, and then he had to go to work, and unfortunately he had a degree. He went to work as a teacher. And as a teacher, he was very successful because since he'd been raised on the streets, pretty much, or at least in a urban environment, he knew how to talk to troubled kids, and he ended up being a head of a school.
Wow.
Totally reformed. But
did you wind up playing with like Wardell Gray, Way Out Wardell, some of these? When you say a-hole, you just mean that they thought that they, in order to get to.
They thought they had to be, very sarcastic, and put down people,
Right. Yeah, not an inclusive vibe for playing music. Yeah.
Fortunately, in the case of this guy I was talking about, drugs were never a part of his life, so it was easy for him to make the adjustment.
Were you, when you first got to L.A., I know you were with Kenton, but when you weren't on the road, were you going to the Lighthouse to sit in? Can you talk a little bit about like your early experiences in Los Angeles?
Yeah, well, like I say, family was always part of it.
Sure.
And I really didn't do much going out or sessioning. Just you know, the only things I did is things where it looked like it might lead to some work.
Interesting. That's very smart. So you weren't, but I mean, you're playing with all the. How'd you meet Claire Fisher? I mean, in a certain respect, the crazy thing. I mean, I'm pretty close with Jim Keltner, and I mean Keltner. I have jazz records of Claire Fisher with Keltner, and Bobby West is the rhythm section. It was a very cool musical time, and I mean, you could be a devout family man. It doesn't mean that Huffsteter wasn't out cooking the groove. You know, I mean, like, but you kind of early on realized I mean, obviously you wanted to pay your bills. You had to sing for your supper. So have you always maintained that kind of, I'm going after something only if there is some potential other work there?
There just wasn't not much in it for me to go to sessions and things. You got to understand that whenever there's a large community of musicians, there's going to be a whole lot of rehearsal groups, and that's where you make your contacts that really count as far as getting work and all of that. Early on, before my family got too big, I used to go to early morning jam sessions. At that time, there would be these jam sessions that would start at 4 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning. And I can remember there was a place out in Watts, terrible neighborhood it must have been. I don't know anything about it. Everybody was asleep when I was there. We would be there, be half a dozen musicians waiting outside of the club, waiting for it to open up at 6, and then the band inside for that particular session was wonderful. It was George Morrow, who used to play with.
Yeah, I know that name, not very well, but I know the name.
Bass player and a drummer named Frank. Oh my God, my mind is going.
Iola or something?
No, I'll think of it.
Yeah.
Just some.
What about like Gene Stone? Did you know Gene Stone?
Guys that were really playing.
Yeah, I mean, because at that time, like, you had like Gary Peacock out there, and like they were doing all that three-way conversation with Gene Stone and stuff like that. I know.
I was in a rehearsal band with Gary.
You were a rehearsal. I love how you're articulating this. I mean, I guess not to jump too far ahead, but one of the cats that I realized before when one of the early times I saw your name, one of the rehearsal bands that did turn into a lot of gigs was Lou Tabakin and Toshiko. Lou is a really dear friend, and I just how did that connection lead to actual work?
Well, the one thing I had in my favor, because I was a good trumpet player, a good hometown guy, Phoenix. Never had any real training and everything, but I could emulate what I heard on records and everything. But when I got to the big city, it became obvious, here's all these guys that have really had training.
Right.
They really know how to do it.
They're on the bandstand, yeah.
But the one thing I could do that most of them couldn't do was improvise. And that's what got me into a lot of bands that I would have never gotten into generally as a trumpet player. But my ability to make instant music got me in all of those bands.
That's profound. Now, I mean, you're not a rhythm section player, so when I think of my favorite trumpet players, it's all about improvising. Are you saying that you were able to say in a short period of concise time a very beautiful sort of phrase? Were you able to stretch out more than cats? Because when I think of trumpet, I only think of improvisation.
My way was never a stretch out way. Well, when I first got to L.A., I was deep into John Coltrane.
Yeah.
The closest I ever came to idolizing a human being was John Coltrane. If I had lived in San Francisco, I would have been a member of the John Coltrane Church. You know,
absolutely, man. Me too.
You know, there was a John Coltrane Church.
There still is, thankfully.
It's still there.
Well, I think they had to move the location, but either way, I mean, he's a driving force on my trip too. Even though I'm 43 years old. Go ahead.
Anyway, as a jazz player at that time, I was definitely avant-garde. And
oh my God, I want to hear tapes of this immediately.
But
you were playing free, dude. That's you like Ornette kind of stuff.
No, well, Ornette was without chords and all of that.
Right.
I'm talking about Coltrane at that time was the avant-garde, and although that was my preference of a way of playing, whenever I would play with a band, I would always play with whatever was Germanic to the band. You know,
absolutely.
It doesn't. No matter how great your solo is, if it doesn't fit with the music that's going on, then it's it's not really music.
No, I dig. So let's get back. How does that lead to Bakken?
Directly, because what they were looking for was an older style trumpet player to go with the way Lou plays.
Well, when you say older style, can you be a little more specific?
Well, at that time, all of the tenor players were imitating John Coltrane in some way or another.
Sure.
Lou had started doing that, and then when he heard what the other guys were doing with it, he realized, you gotta go your own way. And so he went back to a style that was an older approach, not just in the notes and everything, but just in the approach to the way to play the tenor. It was much more like God, who's the other tenor player on the Coltrane album?
Pharoah. Pharoah.
No, the one from Under the Bridge. My God, my mind. This is usually my nap time, by the way.
Me too, actually. Yeah, no, it's fine. You're doing great.
Sonny Rollins is what I'm trying to think.
Okay, yeah. So, and over time, like, that was, I don't want to say lucrative, but you guys did a lot of albums together, and I would assume you did a lot of touring as well.
Yes, we did. We did about a decade before they went back to New York.
Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, how grateful or the gratitude that you have about just essentially being able to is it a fair statement to say that you've been able to make a living, raise your family, and provide playing the music that you love?
It would be more appropriate to say I was able to play the music I love in spite of the fact that I was making a living playing other kinds of music.
Right, so you fit it all in.
I somehow managed. It's still a mystery and a miracle to me.
When going back to Phoenix, can you talk about a specific gig where your ears grew the most on the bandstand? Maybe not everybody was amplified. I mean, ultimately where your ears grew the most early on, and then how did you learn to balance yourself because it's not like you can play some current bassy band or everyone has their own mic, but way back when you were coming up, it's like there were like, I mean, a whole section might have to balance on one microphone. And I just kind of wanted you to talk about those experiences, and because those things to me are the reason why you guys have such warm feeling. I mean, it's great to have facility and chops, but it's got to feel good,
I came of age in stand-kitten era, So the trumpet at that point, up to then, I had been a Harry James clone, which served me very well in most of the work I did early on. But with all those screaming trumpets, I became a high note guy, and anyway, right out of high school, I started working the clubs, as I say, but it was playing dance music, and fortunately, just as I was starting to get ready to make the move from Phoenix, a club opened up there that was large enough to accommodate a big band, and all the acts from Vegas, all the Vegas acts would try out their new material on their way to Vegas and then on their way back to L.A.
Wow.
So for 2 years, I got the experience of playing lead trumpet in a big band and all kinds of music, plus making some contacts with musicians from L.A. And it set me up nicely.
Who did you connect with from L.A.?
Yeah, and that's when it didn't work. When I got to L.A. and started calling all those numbers, what do I do? They all say, you got to get out there and beat the bushes, man.
Yeah. I mean, so what kind of different styles? I mean, I'm thinking. Do you remember the name of the venue that was big enough to bring those big bands in?
It was called the Coco Club.
How do you spell that?
Koko.
The Coco Club. So, when you say a lot of different types of music, were there big bands playing Fats Domino and Little Richard and stuff, or is it? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the types of music you were exposed to?
That particular big band, we were just playing show music.
Like Broadway tunes and stuff.
No, Las Vegas acts.
Ah, can you?
Jerry Lewis,
wow.
Ella Fitzgerald,
Dig.
Stuff like that.
When did you cross paths with Joe Pass?
In 1969. I moved to Los Angeles in 59. In 1969, I finally got my first TV show. And Joe Pass was on the band.
Dude, please tell me what that show was. Because I've heard.
Oh, it was Donald O'Connor. It was a talk show, 6 nights a week. And I was in the band and also on the arranging staff. And that show is still supporting me now. The house I live in, which is approaching on all L.A. prices, it's approaching $1 million.
Damn.
I bought as a fixer back then.
Hold on for a second. So this was like sort of everything's branded today, but I know Cannonball a few years later had a talk show, and Jim Huard and John Guerin and David T. Walker were part of that band. Who else was in the band besides Pass? And ultimately, which tunes from that show have really paid off for you?
It wasn't the particular pieces. It was that this was finally a full-fledged union job.
Dig.
With all the perks, we did 6 shows a week, and all of those shows paid into various funds, which are still paying now.
So it was who was in the rhythm section?
It wasn't Joe was the only real jazz guy on the band. One of the tenor players. Well, it was. Let me see. It was there were 6 horns, and they were just typical. The horn section was typical L.A. guys that play a broad range of music.
It was like Don Menza or like Conti Condo.
Guys like that.
Yeah.
Don would have been perfect for the gig.
Right. So, but the point is that, can you talk about hitting live? I mean, that to me was the most exciting part about that time period of music being incorporated with live TV. Is just the idea that, can you talk about the prep? Once you got in the groove 6 nights a week, and you were arranging, how did you keep the music fresh? And can you just talk about that idea of everything today is broken up, or there's overdubs, or this, that, and the other? Back then, it was just you hit.
Yeah, well, that's when you get into that level of LA musicians, everything is expected to be right the first time. You don't need the overdubs, and the writers understand that this is TV. You don't write anything that's going to require overdubbing or anything like that. There's a whole art of arranging for TV so that it's going to sound great the first time, and you don't have to do a bunch of rehearsing. The guys that can write that way do very well.
You know, one thing I wanted to ask you about, it doesn't show up on your discography, but I'm not going to, I need the full story about, because in my mind, what's been paying your house mortgage is Soul Fu Young, Willie Bobo and the Bo Gents.
Actually, that album.
I have the album.
Is still, that's still paying our royalties.
Explain how that band ultimately. How did you meet Willie? How did the band come together? That was your first work as in publishing, I think.
It all came from an album that I did with Joe Torres.
Who was Joe Torres, by the way?
Joe Torres was a percussionist he was the best percussionist around and everything.
Wow. I've seen his records. Yeah.
He was doing all the hip Latin gigs and everything. And anyway, he got a chance to do this album, and his wife made it a do or die situation. You know, okay, make the album. If it works and we can make a living out of that, then otherwise you got to go out and get a job. So he made the album and he went out and got a job, a very good one. He was an international representative for a company, and Joe is 90 years old now, and he's still at it. He's just putting together a new band. I'm writing for him.
Well, I might need to spend a little time talking to him, man.
Oh God, you'd love it.
Oh my God, dude, that is one of the most inspirational stories I've ever heard of. But Bobo was on that session?
No, Bobo was still in New York at the time.
Okay.
But as a result, the tune I wrote on there, Nightwalk. That was the big one for the album. And
Nightwalk or Nighthawk?
Yeah,
a Nightwalk, dude. I gotta so there was like some infectious hook, or that got some radio play.
And plus everybody's recorded it since then. Willie recorded it in New York.
Wow.
And he called me and he had heard it and he wanted to record it. And but then a short time later, he decided to come to Los Angeles, and he wanted me to put together a band for him. In fact, he wanted me to put together a band for me, and he would head the band, but I would take care of the band. He didn't want to have to deal with the band, which turned out to be totally wrong, because right away he started bossing everybody around, and hey, wait a minute, So anyway, that was the beginning of a relationship that went on for decades. And we loved each other, and we fought like brothers.
I love this. So this is making my day, man.
He fired me a lot.
But I mean, that album is so badass. It's like it's pretty expensive album today. It's hard to find. Where were those photos taken? You guys are in some like the hood somewhere, dude.
Well, that was Watts Towers.
What? And the Bow Gents, where did that name? Did you guys play some?
That's at the time there was there were a whole lot of bands that had singers, and I can't come up with
like Irene Krall or.
Yeah, no, the backup singers.
Oh, like Claudia King and stuff?
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Claudia King.
Yeah, I mean, dude, did Willie Bobo, man. So you're telling me Bobo cold called you because he heard that track off the Torres record?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like, at that time, all the calls were operator assisted. And,
that's so great. That is so great.
So I get this operator, and she says, "I have a call from New York from a Mr. Boo Boo."
A Mr. Boo Boo.
And I hear this voice on the other end say, "That's Bobo."
So talk a little bit about that. I mean, did you, because he wanted you to put a band together? I mean, Barry Zweig, Barry Zweig, Pantoa. Can you talk about all those cats? Like, not just, especially some of the Reggie Andrews?
Reggie, after that, he became a school teacher shortly after that, and he's done a whole lot for Los Angeles kids.
And what? Yeah.
But he never got onto the L.A. scene very much. He just settled in.
Let me ask you, can you just talk about, was Torres the percussionist for Kenton?
Whom?
Joe Torres.
No,
So.
No, Joe never did anything but the Latin stuff.
He did the Latin stuff. I wanted you to talk about what are the most important qualities of leadership, and who's the best leader that you ever worked for?
Well, unfortunately, there was a tradition among leaders. Just it's hard to figure out what was behind it, other than just tradition of, I had to go through this, now you have
That's
to
right.
go through it.
That's right. Yep.
But there were always leaders that broke with that, and fortunately, by the time I started playing with the big bands, I didn't have to put up with many awful leaders.
What would you say about, like, like
all the majors that I worked for were all wonderful. The Toshiko and Lou, Bob Florence.
What was Kenton? What made him a transcendent figure? Just for cats that weren't. I mean, the amount, like you said. I mean, their thrift stores are drowning in Stan Kenton Capitol records. I could use a little more Soul Fu Young, and that kind of stuff. But like Kenton, I mean, Did you learn to sleep sitting up on the bus? I mean, I know Erskine, that he was later than you, but talk about Kenton.
Well, Stan had a period in the decade before that where he had a lot of guys on the band with some serious dope problems, and he had to put up with it because they were the stars, and by the time I was working with him, he was hiring bands directly out of college, out of North Texas State. He didn't want to have any more to do with stars, and he was so paranoid about drugs that the reason I got hired was the band was coming back from the end of a tour, and they stopped in Phoenix. They're on the way to L.A. They're on the end of the tour is over. They're going to take a few months off and then regroup. This is what they back then it was always 3 months out, 3 months back in town. So they're on their way back to town. He stops the bus in Phoenix and calls the union, the musicians union. Do you have any trumpet players? This is Stan Kenton. Do you have any trumpet players that could play with my band? No, the only one we know that's been around here was this Steve Huffsteter, but he just moved to L.A. So Stan figured, well, maybe he hasn't been there long enough to become contaminated, and so they called me.
Wow. Wow, that's a mind-bending story, man. What was that experience like? Who was the rhythm section in that original in the band you were in?
Like I say, it was a bunch of kids out of
wow. Really, still at that time. It's interesting.
Yeah, and actually it was wonderful because almost all of what we were doing was just playing high school dances, and the dance book was written by Lenny Niehaus, and it was just a delight to play. The musicians were good. They're all young, but they were good, and they most of them had been with the band for a while, so they were well acclimated into the music. And the first trumpet player was Bud Brisboy.
Yes,
who is almost all the big high note trumpet players in the last 20 years coming out of Los Angeles were all Bud Brisboy students.
Did you play Shelley's Manhole?
Oh, sure.
With like in like small ensembles?
Yeah.
Like who was in those bands? Like to me, like that band. Another guy who was channeling John Coltrane was John Gross, and like there was, that whole milieu of John Morell.
That band that Shelley had at that club was better than most of the bands that came in.
Steve, I completely...
John Gross, and Gary Barone.
John Gross, Gary Barone, Jeffrey Castleman on bass, Mike Wofford on piano.
Oh, God.
It was like, dude, the album they made in Shelley did a whole Zen Trickster move on them. It's called Mankind. It's like the funkiest drumming I've ever heard from Shelley Mann in my life. And John Morell, Barone, Gross, and he came in, he's like, fellas, I have the studio rented out for 3 days, so today we're just going to run through the material, and then we'll record the 2 days after. And so after the first day, he said, okay, guys, because they were burning, they were all relaxed. They didn't think they were being recorded. He's like, that's it, we're done. And they all freaked out. They were like, what are you talking about? And John Gross told me, he's like, you know what, Shelley was totally right. The music is on fire. I'm like, this is what this band was playing at Shelley's Manhole in 1972? I mean, it was ridiculous. And Herbie's band was no slouch. I mean, it was like, to see Herbie, Shelley, because there was no intermission break, right? It was like one band. It was like 6 bands straight. Who did you play there with?
I was usually with Willie Bobo at that time.
And the band that you put together?
Well, that situation didn't last very long. It was obvious that it wasn't my band.
Yeah, no, I did. But he did. Eventually, you were like, "Hey, Willie, just do it yourself."
I don't think we even had to talk about it.
So you played there with what? Like Bobo would be on timbales. Like who would play drums? Like who was in those? That to me is like insane.
Willie had a buddy named. I had his name and it just left me. It'll come right back. Yeah. Anyway, he was a buddy from Spanish Harlem. Interesting story about him. He was one summer night in Spanish Harlem. He was necking with some girl in an alley, and it was a walk through alleyway. Victor Pantoja was
Victor Pantoja.
And he was necking with a girl in the alley, and another couple walked by, and as they walked by, the other guy just stuck a knife into Victor.
Holy shit.
And Victor pulled out the knife, chased the guy down the alley. When they got to the street, there were 2 old men there playing checkers, sitting on these big old wooden milk carts, containers. And he picked that thing up and brained the guy, and then then turned around just in time to see the guy's girlfriend coming at him with a knife.
Oh my.
He knocked her out and fell unconscious. When he came to the court on a stretcher, the judge wouldn't believe that there hadn't been some kind of prior animosity between the 2 guys. And they wouldn't believe it was self-defense. And so Victor served some time in prison. And he got out just after Willie formed his band with me. And so he became a lifelong friend and the greatest conga ever. Never flashy, never, hey, follow me, guys, any of that thing. Just the most perfect.
Dude, you are. I think you might have led the most magical life of any musician I've interviewed, and I've interviewed like 2,000. I mean, not Pantoja. I mean, he was up in the Bay Area doing like Paul Jackson learned the clave beat from Pantoja. That guy was ubiquitous. He was in a band called Azteca. You're telling me that after he got out of prison, Willie brought him to L.A. and all of a sudden it's so was there even a trap drummer in that band at Shelley's?
Oh, not that I know of.
It was timbale, conga, trumpet. What else?
There was always at least trumpet and tenor. There was one period where we added a trombone, but most time it was just the 2 horns.
Who was the sax player?
Who was what?
Who played sax?
Ron Starr was a guy that was with us for a long time.
Ron Starr. And did you have guitar too, or no?
No. But when Ray Pizzi came on the band, then it was Ray and I used to make an insanity pact every night, as crazy as we could, and get away with it. I remember Leonard Feather revering the band one night, and he said, and of course backed by by the small dependable horn section, and Ray and I both yelled, "We were never either."
So I mean, Feather saw it as like a, I hate that word fusion, but it was blues. It was Latin. Really, that word funk had not entered the lexicon yet. So it was.
Oh yes, it had. Yeah.
But you would say things in the late '60s. You would say things like, "Let's play some funky blues," but there was no word in the lexicon for funk music. That came along with the Headhunters, like Herbie in '73. I'm not sure what years you were playing at the Manhole with Willie, but I'm just saying, like, how did Feather character? Why was he so enthralled with your band?
Well, Leonard Feather. That's a whole nother subject.
Dude. I love this, dude. Oh man.
But he was a force. Toshiko went way out of her way to befriend Leonard and get his backing.
Absolutely.
Toshiko was very smart, by the way. The way she put together a band, it was amazing. She got backing from the Japanese community.
Well, she was playing with Hampton Hawes back in Japan. I mean, the woman, and I think Oscar Peter through Norman Granz, Oscar Peters.
I'm talking about the American Japanese community.
American Japanese community.
Financial backing.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, that's a whole different ball of wax. But I mean, would you say that you guys were doing? I mean, Jader was doing stuff with Mongol and Willie, but was Willie's band an extension of Vocabulary off of just what we know as Latin jazz?
Yeah, but his contribution was and really an extension of what Mongol did. Which is whether or not the word was then, it was funk.
It was funk. Yeah. But it was acoustic funk.
Latin funk.
But it was acoustic, though.
Oh, mostly.
Was there an upright bass player?
Sure.
Who played upright?
Boy, you would have me there.
I got you. No, it doesn't even matter. The point is, it was not amplified. There was not electric bass or Fender Rhodes.
It was definitely electric bass, sure.
It was electric bass. It was electric? Really? Okay.
The Latin bands always use this little in between Latin bass. It was played standing up, but it was just a plastic body, rather than the big full body of a full size viol. But it wasn't a guitar. It wasn't
right. It had a little more punch than the upright.
Yeah, and you got to understand, in a Latin band, there's so much sound concentrated in the mid register.
Right.
All those drums and everything, and the mid and low register, and it just gets full. You can't hear notes through it. It's just percussion. And the stand-up bass is very boomy, and it gets lost in all of that. So that in-between bass has a really clear sound where you hear the bass notes, but without the boominess of them. Where they're more like a guitar note.
I mean, in a very simplistic form, I'm not sure if besides Pantoa and Willie, if there was any other drums, but what were you listening?
He always used a drummer.
So there was a trap. There was a trap set as well.
Yeah.
Who played drums?
He went through a whole bunch of them.
Okay.
He didn't care. He didn't care because he said that it didn't matter, because he would tell him exactly what he wanted. Just keep doing that, and I'll be doing my stuff.
Yeah, it's not that inspiring for the musician, but Willie had. I mean, Bill Cosby would come check you guys out.
Who's that?
Bill Cosby.
A lot.
A lot, dude, because I've done 2 interviews with Bill before the world caved in on him about his involvement in music. And he loved, I don't need to tell you this.
They were buddies. They were buddies. There was no doubt about it. In fact, I was doing the Hollywood Bowl or the Playboy Festival one time, and the stage there revolves. So
Right.
one band will be all ready when the other one quits, and then the stage revolves, and there's the new band, and the stage revolved around, and here I am, sitting in the back of the band, and Bill goes walking out to the mic, and halfway out there, he looks back and sees me, and stops and walks back and has a conversation with me while the crowd waits.
Wow.
He hadn't seen me since the Willie Vogel.
Because, when I interviewed Tony Orlando, he said that him and Bill would just smoke cigars and sit at the Village Gate and watch, I forget who it was. It was, I guess, Ray Mantilla and, Chief Bay, all those, and for hours. Like 4 or 5 hours, they just sit there and just with the sunglasses on, just getting discargo over that stuff. That's as we wrap up here, part 1 with Steve Huffsteter. Can you just talk a little bit about, how music has kept you in an elevated space, how it can be a healing force. How rhythm can be a healing force in life and keep you healthy.
How long is your show?
I'm just saying, for me as a journalist,
you're talking my stuff now.
Yeah. Now, the floor is yours, man. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm 86, and I'm a caregiver to a 90-year-old woman, and we just giggle and laugh and play all day. She for 20 years she played percussion in my big band, and it's the love of music and the love of life that keeps us going. So
wow,
I recommend it.
You consider her a soulmate?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah, so you're blessed in that sense, and I think that if you can find your soulmate and you can trust yourself, then it will make for a great thing. By the way, just tell me a really good Jock Ellis story. He connected us. I figure you guys were probably causing debauchery back with the Barone, Ed Green, John Morell days. Maybe you didn't, I don't know, maybe you met him later. But, Jock and Wolfgang and Tim McIntyre and Don Poncher and Rubenstein, those guys, Huffsteter, it's just a whole slew of just beautiful
that whole bunch,
cats.
That whole bunch the thing that brings them all together was a guy named Bill Smith.
Now, who is that?
When I first came to town, when that gig at the Coco ended in Phoenix, I took a trial trip by myself, left my wife with my kids, with my folks, and came over to Phoenix and spent a couple months just checking things out. And during that time, Miles came to town with the classic sextet, with Cannonball and Coltrane.
Bill Evans, yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
wow.
For that band.
Wow.
So in spite of the fact that I didn't have any money, I went to that. And on the break, I was walking outside and I smelled some marijuana. Went over and asked if I could have some, and met this guy, Bill Smith.
Wow.
And a short time later, the Arizona unemployment cut me off on a technicality, and Bill Smith took me in for a while. And it turned out that there were all these people that would show up and hang out with him from all disciplines, And
what you mean? Like
actors
philosophers
and musicians and everything. You know, they just to come and hang out with him. He was at the time working as a curator in a archaeological.
Dude, this man sounds absolutely cosmic. And he was just roasting a joint. Where was the club? The It Club? Where were you seeing them?
Well, the club that was at was their last night as a jazz club. It was right at Santa Monica and can't think of the other club, but it was.
Anyway, the club was closing.
Yeah, it was a good location, and the next night they reopened as the Pink Pussycat. But through this guy, Bill Smith, I met all these people. And Bill went on a tour of when on a clear day you can see forever, that show. He went on a tour, and John Rubinstein and Jock Ellis were both on the tour. And so I was probably 30, 40 years ago, and Jock and I have been very close ever since.
Hold on a second. This was, you got to go. You just blew my mind there. What was this gig?
It was the road show of On a Clear Day You Can See Forever.
Unbelievable. And so you just.
Even there on the road, every night there would be a party in Bill Smith's room. He would always have food and all sorts of stuff.
Well, I mean, this guy sounds like a guru of sorts. I mean, I cannot believe that Huffsteter connected with this cat smoking a joint, man.
Me? Oh, I've smoked all my life.
No. I just think it's cosmic. I mean, was this before or after you got hooked into that that TV show with Pass? That was the show with Joe Pass was in '69. That TV show.
Yeah.
And that was like a steady union gig. But the gig that you had with Rubinstein and Jock, was that before or after that?
Well, I wasn't on that. Bill Smith and Jock and John Rubinstein were all on that thing together. John Rubinstein wasn't a musician at the time. He was an
actor. Still, yeah.
His famous dad had embarrassed him so many times. Hey, Johnny, sit down and play your new piece for Igor. You know.
I don't blame him. He was a badass player, though, man. Fucking nasty player.
Yeah. But due to circumstances, John found out he could write music very easily, and along with his acting work, he had a couple shows where he wrote all the music. Anyway, Jock Ellis.
So you didn't. I'm sorry. The band On a Clear Day you can that band you weren't in.
No.
Okay, so I'm just trying to be clear.
Yeah.
So they were on? It was a road show, and then there were nights playing locally in L.A. where they'd come back to Bill's house, and you'd meet, and you hung with Jock.
He and Jock and this Bill Smith that I used to hang with got tight, and so with that we met through this guy Bill Smith, and there's a piece of music, the Bach two-part inventions written for piano, but they work out perfect for trumpet and trombone if you have the chops to be able to play them. And Jock and I have been playing those together for 40 years.
Wow.
So
you would talk the Bill Smith, Bill in the roughly early 80s connected you guys? That was the first time you really got to know, you shook hands with Jock?
Yeah, it was probably more like the 70s.
In the 70s?
Whenever that show was the Clear Day show.
Right. And when was the first time you played with Jock?
Again, we would get to.
Here's the better question. Did you wind up after meeting each other like you guys were did you guys wind up cutting in the studio together? Do you remember any legendary studio?
No, well, Jock and I have never worked together very much. We were in different kinds of music.
Oh,
Jock
it's fascinating.
was never a jazz guy.
Right, and yet yesterday I call you and Jock was in rehearsal band, right?
Yeah.
It all comes around.
Yeah. Well, right now I have a brass quintet. That's 2 trumpets, trombone, French horn, and tuba.
Beautiful.
That rehearse every Tuesday, and Jock is in that band. He's a great player.
One final question for you, Mr. Huffsteter. He's a great player. So are you. Like in the Wrecking Crew, I'm talking about like Lou Blackburn, Glenn Campbell, Leon Russell, Hal Blaine, like that original crew. I know that was right when you were getting out there, but who was like a Wrecking Crew trumpet player? Who were the Wrecking Crew trumpet players when you got out there?
I don't know. I know later a guy named Steve Madeo was doing a lot of that stuff.
I don't even know that name.
Yeah, but at that time, it was probably just whoever was available.
Wow. And just for the record, the first studio recording you were on was Joe Torres, or was there anything before that?
No, the first studio, other than things that I did in Phoenix, but the first thing in L.A. was Stan Kenton.
That's so you cut some 45s in Phoenix?
Well, I didn't catch that.
Like you made some demo recordings, or you cut a 40?
Oh, well, no, there were bands that were recording, in Phoenix. There was a Latin band, a guy named Pete Bougarine, that I did a bunch of recordings for. What a wonderful character he was.
Wait, Booga was his nickname?
Pete Bougarine was his real name.
How do you spell the last name?
Bugarin.
Wow. Are you kidding? What? Oh my, that must have been greasy music. That's greasy music right there. Well, Pantoa and Willie Bobo are looking over this conversation because my whole show has been dedicated to rhythm, because it's about the only thing that's healing me right now is live, vibrational healing from being pulverized by that from the stage. Doesn't matter what kind of music, as long as the cats are going for it, that's all that matters. Much love, dude, and take care. Have fun with your soulmate.
Okay, thanks.
Be cool, man. Bye.